Guys, in a recent episode of 1000 Pound Sisters, Amy confessed something crazy. So it turns out that their family has a big crime scandal in it, and I promise you, this is going to leave you shocked. So when Amy first brought this true crime story up on the show, everyone was completely shocked, and there were a couple of reasons for that. For one, she kind of just threw it in super casually, and she even laughed at one point like she was just telling a pretty normal story, but there was nothing normal about what she had to say. And so the story first came up when Amy noted that her brother Chris reminded her of her granddad, and then as an afterthought she added that her granddad had passed away a while ago, but it wasn't exactly a peaceful passing. Amy said that her granddad had a drinking problem which caused issues for the whole family, and when addressing his passing said that he passed away because he drank some antifreeze. And antifreeze is a liquid that is used to regulate engines during extreme temperatures, so it's not exactly something that you should be putting into your body at all, but it's not like Amy's granddad drank antifreeze on purpose. It turns out that he was poisoned, and what's worse and even more shocking is that it was actually Amy's uncle who fed it to him. And this is obviously an extremely shocking and just upsetting story, which makes it even more unbelievable that Amy was talking about it in such a casual, kind of matter-of-fact way. I mean, at first I thought that she was just, might have been joking, but she even added that there was a book about what happened, and like many people online, I thought that she was just talking about something that only happened in a book and not in real life. But it turns out that despite her strange attitude towards the whole thing, Amy wasn't just messing around. Apparently, the whole thing actually did happen, and there is a book on it. So the book came out on February 5th of 2011 and was written by a man named Harry Spiller, and Harry is actually a former small-town Illinois sheriff and investigator, and he wrote this book as well as several others, and the book is actually still available on Amazon to this day, and the chapter about Amy and Tammy's granddad has the word antifreeze in it, so it really seems like everything that Amy said on the show was actually true. And it gets even crazier because when you go on Amazon and look up the book, you'll see that it has 17 reviews, and one of the reviews was actually written by Amy herself. So on January 23rd, 2015, Amy wrote, "Very sad book. My grandpa was one of the chapters in it." And she also gave the book 5 stars. And weirdly enough, though, the most recent review was submitted on February 19th, 2023, and it had someone claim that the antifreeze chapter wasn't actually in the book at all, and someone wrote they bought the book specifically to read about the case because it was featured on 1000 Pound Sisters, but they said that they were disappointed to find out that the chapter wasn't actually there, and that, seems pretty strange, seeing as Amy herself reviewed the same book, saying that the chapter was there. But honestly, it's probably the least weird thing about this whole case, because the story of what happened to Amy and Tammy's granddad is just disturbing and really sad. So the sisters' granddad was named Charles T. Ellis, and he reportedly passed away at about 10 a.m. at St. Mary's Hospital in Evansville, Indiana, and this all happened on November 21st, 1986, which interestingly enough was just a couple of months after Tammy was born. Tammy was born on July 27th, 1986, and Amy was born on October 28th, 1987, and maybe that was one of the reasons why Amy was able to talk so casually about the incident. I mean, she seemed to think that it was mostly just interesting thing about her family that she could just randomly share on TV, and I think many of us were shocked that she wasn't more solemn or serious when talking about it, but since it happened before she was even born, I feel like her attitude makes, way more sense now. But Amy obviously never met her granddad, Charles, and even if her sister Tammy had met him, she probably has no memory of him at all, and seeing as she was still a newborn when he passed away, but because of this, it's possible that to Amy, it just kind of feels like something that would have happened ages ago, and that doesn't really affect her much at all. And having said that, Charles was still her grandpa, so I'm not still sure that her behavior was entirely appropriate, but at least, it makes a little bit more sense now. But what happened to Charles was really a tragedy. So he spent 2 weeks in the hospital fighting for his life, and when he first was transported to the hospital, the doctors thought that he just suffered a stroke, but the truth turned out to be much darker than that, and eventually it was discovered that Charles didn't have a stroke, but he was poisoned. But in the book, it says that he passed away because of acute kidney failure due to a substance found in antifreeze, as well as waxes and varnishes and shoe polish, and Charles's family was questioned about this, and many of them reportedly said that they remembered a foul-tasting pitcher of iced tea that was in the house before Charles passed away. And the worst thing about that is that Amy mentioned on the show that Charles was poisoned by someone in the family, and that someone was actually his son, Charles H. Ellis. And Charles Jr. apparently claimed that he took the iced tea to be analyzed before he got rid of it, but someone else in the family apparently claimed that he was really opposed to an autopsy, and eventually the police found enough evidence that it was Charles Jr. who'd poisoned his own father. And the two of them actually lived together at the time, so this wouldn't have been that difficult for him to do, and the police took Charles Jr. in for questioning 5 days after his father's passing, and things got even stranger at that point. Reportedly, they found a bunch of small cuts in his arms, and obviously this seemed pretty weird and suspicious, and they apparently later found out that these cuts were from some cult rituals. But there's more, because as the questioning went on, the police realized that there were a bunch of discrepancies in Charles Jr.'s story, and eventually Amy's uncle had to take a polygraph test, and he reportedly admitted to losing all willpower. And then, in January 1987, Charles pleaded guilty to taking his own father's life, and he was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison, and the rest is pretty much history. And in 2011, the book which featured the details of this case came out, and we're finding out about it now because Amy was randomly reminded of her grandpa while looking at Chris. And honestly, this whole story is just so strange and upsetting, and what happened to Amy and Tammy's granddad is obviously just horrible, and it must have been really difficult for the entire family. And it seems that, luckily, some of them have been able to move on, though, at least, to some extent. But otherwise, I doubt that Amy would even be talking about this on TV in such a casual way. But still, it was a shock to hear her talk about it on the show, and I don't think anyone was expecting something like that to come out of her. But like I said, a lot of people thought she was just making stuff up at first, but it turns out that no, she was telling the truth, no matter how unbelievable that may sound. But anyway, what do you guys think? Were you shocked by Amy's story? Did you also think that she may have been making it up? Guys, let me know in the comments below.